Welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast. Here is Munir El-Azouzi from easymedicaldevice.com. And today we want to talk about clinical evaluation reports, but we want to talk specifically about a specific aspect about it is about product equivalence. I know that there is a lot of questions about that. How can I say that my product is equivalent to another product? How can I mention that on the CER? And then, how can is a regulator will accept what I will show him or I will provide to him? And for that, I have with me a guest. So I have with me Helene Quie from Qmed Consulting, and she will help us to define all this and answer our questions. So, Helene, welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast.
Thank you, Munir, and thank you for inviting me. I've been looking forward to this. So I know it's a hot topic, so I'll do my best to enlighten it.
Yeah, great. So just for the audience, so Helene also has a podcast that I'm also following, and I will advise you also to look for it. And we'll talk about that more at the end of the episode. But Helene, maybe at the beginning, just for you, a small introduction, and then we can go to the meat of the episode with this topic.
Yes. So as you said, my name is Helene Quie and CEO of Qmed Consulting. So basically both a CRO and a consultancy. And in the consultancy work, we are working in we're helping clients to understand the pathway that they need to go developing their clinical evidence package, where clinical evaluation is becoming a core documentation process. So this is a large part of our work. We are involved with both small and large clients, and it is a hurdle. But I will also say it's a very it's a good process to come through as a company to make sure that before you go head-to-head with a notified body, that you have your clinical evidence in place that supports your claim, and you can obtain your CE mark hopefully without large delays. Yeah. So that is core of our business, yeah.
Okay, so as I mentioned, so usually I'm inviting guests that are really SME for those topics, and I think you are really a good SME for that, as you have experience on it. I think with the new medical device regulation, there was a lot of changes happening on this area of the clinical evaluation, clinical investigation area. So, my first question regarding to this topic is, what did the MDR change for the clinical evaluation report? Is there something that is really obvious, or it's really on details? So what are exactly those changes?
Yeah. The main change with the MDR, or basically, I thought about how I knew you would ask this question, right? So I wanted to say nothing, and then I'll say, you bring me a cup of coffee, because the main concept around doing a clinical evaluation has not really changed, but the equivalence principle that we'll discuss later, either didn't change, but the way that the notified body interpreted it will change dramatically, and we're already seeing the signs. Of course, then also the content and the description in the MDR compared to the MDD. There are a lot of more details in the MDR, which is very helpful for everyone to have a clear understanding of what is actually required. And the notified bodies are also becoming more and more clear in their communication on how to interpret that text. Okay. So, for instance, the understanding of sufficient clinical evidence, and this is something everyone have asked about. What do you mean? What is sufficient? That is too fluffy. And they have actually come out, and we can discuss that later also. What does it mean? Because it's very outlined, and it makes it much easier actually to work with. Another thing which has changed and which will influence on the clinical evaluation process is, for instance, the classifications. There are some changes to classifications. You need to be aware about that. The essential requirements have changed. They're more or less the same, but the numbers has changed. You need to make sure that you capture the right essential requirements to be covered with your clinical evaluation report and your clinical evidence data. So there are these specific items that we can try and go through and then see how they will actually influence. And they come from a directly outlined in the MDR, but they didn't really change.
Okay.
They're just much more specific. And of course, notified body says about 80% of the medical devices, which are approximately 80% on the market, will need to go out and re-establish their clinical evidence and initiate activities. So that shows the change. The understanding of the whole principle has been enforced. So.
Okay, and so I suppose that with all those specific requirements or the deep dive that we have now on the MDR, as you said, there is maybe some interpretation also from manufacturers. They said, oh, we've done that on that way. Now we should maybe be more specific on some other ways. So this is mainly what the struggle actually for the manufacturers is really to rethink or reset and start again with a new thinking for maybe some of their previous mindset in terms of clinical evaluation report writing.
Yeah, the things that's precisely what it is, because the text is more or less the same way it specifies the definition. It has a focus more on post-market clinical follow-up activities because the notified body and the commissions, or it is the commission, wants us to keep a close eye on the products when they're out there on the markets. But we can talk about post-market clinical follow-up in another session. So, but this understanding of sufficient clinical evidence will mean that there are definitely some clients that will lose their CE mark because they are not able to demonstrate sufficient clinical evidence with the data that they have. Their claims doesn't fit with the evidence that they have available. So it becomes crystal clear in this process, the way that the MDR has specified it, what you actually need to look for.
Okay. We have the data that is coming from some literature, I suppose. There is a clinical investigation data that they have done. There is also PMCF if they have. So if some manufacturers did only use literature to justify the clinical efficacy or performance for their products, maybe now it's not enough and they have to go more deeply. And I suppose the PMCF can help them if they are starting to do that from now.
Yeah, if they are lucky, if you can say that they have thought the process through and they have their CE mark and it through the grace period, they can keep their CE mark on their product. This is the time to do the gap analysis, to do the clinical evidence gap analysis. What do we want to claim? Go to the marketing and sales department and say, what are we claiming? What data do we actually need? Go back and look at what we have. And is that sufficient? Clinical, amount, and also quality. These are the two keywords that you have to keep in mind, quality and amount. And Qmed has actually been so kind, clear is kind, been out and saying, what do we need, what do we mean about sufficient amount and quality, and specified it very clearly. And basically amount means that you should have statistical rationale behind your product. So the right number of patients with a sufficient amount of products, all the target groups are covered, your claims are covered, and safety and performance, so your essential requirements are covered. So very, very, it goes line by line what you need to do. And sufficient quality, when I listen to how Qmed interpreted it, is basically you have to follow 14155.
Okay.
So it's easy, right? It's not easy, but if you follow the recipe for a good clinical trial, then, and you have a statistical rationale, you cover your claims with the patient groups and the indications and all these things, then it's sufficient clinical evidence, and you can use these data to support your CE mark under the MDR.
Okay. Now on the topic of today, we will specifically go through the equivalence of products. So I suppose that we had already of manufacturers that use equivalence of products on their CER to say that we are equivalent to this product, so we can use the literature that this company has produced to justify that our product is safe for the patients and can be CE marked. Does this change now with the new medical device regulation?
Yes and no. The principle around equivalence is still the same. So you need to be able to demonstrate that you have technical, clinical, and biological equivalence. You need to show that basically to one product, one equivalent product. And they have actually specified in the MDR, and if you follow also the MEDEV guideline for clinical evaluation process, the MEDEV 2.7/1 revision 4 from 2016, then if you follow that process, demonstrate these 3 parameters, then you can claim equivalence. But the thing is here that they really mean it this time. Previously, you've been able to negotiate, and I was presenting some months ago, and also this has been normal practice. We all tried to put the puzzle together, and we took one device there and one device there, and we put it and said, well, same. And it's not same anymore.
Okay.
So you need to be able to demonstrate on all 3 parameters, and they are specified. So if you look at clinical evidence, it must be the same clinical condition or purpose, and also similar severity and state of disease, for instance. So very specific and very precise. Used in the same side of the body, used in a similar population, so in regards to age and gender and anatomy and physiology. Same kind of user and same kind of critical performance. So if you can fulfill that, then you are able to demonstrate clinical equivalence. The same for biological and technical equivalence. And there, it's I don't want to go into too many details there, but specifically for technical equivalence, there is one point where you need to be able to refer back to the specification of your equivalent product that you are the same. Mm-hmm. And before you could take a catheter and the catheter with a stent and say, well, these are the same, it's a stent. You really have to have the drawings now. And you have to have the material specifications. And how do you do that? Well, as it says in the MDR, you need to have access to that through a contract with the provider of the equivalent product, so the manufacturer. And who would do that? Of course, if there's a business, you will always see it happen, right? If somebody can earn money on it, and I don't want to, it will happen at a certain point, but it's not something that will happen tomorrow. So this is specifically for the high-risk class products. The Commission have said that you have to have these 3 parameters for clinical, technical, and biological equivalence. It needs to be to a single device. All other products which are, in the range, this is what we call similar products when we write a clinical evaluation. So there is equivalent and similar devices. So if you want to kind of assume that this principle of equivalence, you have to, as I say, have access to the technical documentation. Then you can claim equivalence, or if you have the product yourself, if it's same product in your own manufacturing facility, then you also have access to the technical documentation.
But just one thing. So in terms of equivalence, technical equivalence. So I had some people that were saying, "Oh, I just have to buy my competitor's product, make the same test on a bench, and get the data like a benchmarking, and then I can use that to say I have done the test. I prove that my product is equivalent to the other product." Is it something that we can do or not?
Yeah, it's in one of the podcasts, I had Basil Akra from TÜV, and he actually stated that as a personal opinion, and where he's finding this in the MDR, he's a hotshot, so I listen carefully what he's saying.
Yeah, yeah.
It makes some sense, and I also looked into the wording. So for class 3 devices and implantable devices, no way, go and do a clinical study or investigation. For lower risk class products, if you can do that, you need to know the material, so biological, technical, and clinical. So clinical, you base that on publications, and you have the evidence from there that is used on the same population and age and all these things. And the technical you get from reverse engineering. Yes, you buy it, you split it, you measure it, and you test it, then you can do it. That's how he interpreted the text, and I can also read it from the text. And of course, it's a whole. It's not a whole, but it's an opportunity for lower risk class products, because honestly, there are products in the lower risk class that you will never ever be able to do an ISO 14155 clinical investigation on. Who would do it, right? All these. There are so many accessories and devices that are used as a commodity good that have been sold for 30, 40, 50 years, and you're not able to find sites, investigators, and ethically run a clinical investigation to show that.
I think it's more the ethical part that is important here.
Yeah.
We'll not redo tests on human on things that we have enough experience, enough results, enough literature, enough things. So at the end, it will be a torture, if I can say.
Yeah.
It's on humans.
It will be painful, basically. You see an investigator with a new heart valve and then this catheter or whatever it is, which are lower risk class. But it's really a struggle for many of our clients who have these products, that they, I think the balance, it will come, but some, because the communication with the notified bodies right now are a little, it's tough because they're very, very busy. It's not because they don't want to talk to you, but and then, you can read in the MDR and you see, oh, I'm in trouble here. I don't know how to do this. How can I succeed in finding clinical evidence to support my CE mark?
Okay.
So, but the best way, and that's what we all being told, is to, go right straight into it. Do your documentation. So for the low risk class product, it doesn't mean that you don't have to do a clinical evaluation report, and you need to set up your processes according to the MDR, because that's one of the things that maybe it hasn't really changed, but it's very specific that the notified body and the commission, they would like you to plan the process and then write your result in a report. And if you change your plans, you need to communicate that to your notified bodies. Don't just sit on it, be proactive.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you will be missing bits and pieces because this is a new regulation. You will not be able to do this 100%. Nobody would be able to do that. But if you show that you proactively have your clinical evaluation process in place, then I would expect that most people would be fine. And this is also for lower risk class products. You will need a clinical evaluation, short or long, but you have to sit down and do this work.
Okay. So, is there something else on the equivalence of products that we should look for?
I think in the work where there is a link with the equivalence principle to how your plan also for your post-market clinical surveillance, or not surveillance, post-market clinical follow-up. And it's not something that we will touch on today, but there are some strategical things here to consider. And maybe strategically, it's worth not trying so hard to find an equivalent product.
Okay.
And just do these clinical
follow-up,
studies,
exactly.
right?
To justify.
It will bring so much to the company of better clinical data that will support both your clients and the patients and the whole situation, basically. And there are tools out there. People are used to doing this on good sites. And there are other ways also. It says post-market clinical follow-up activities. So it's not just surveys and clinical investigations. And with these different kinds of devices, try and put up the rationale. And that's one of the things that the notified body are very interested in, is that you argue or you come with a justification for the method that you are choosing. So this can be, as long as you have a good reason and it's solid, I would go for it.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of devices would need a clinical investigation.
So I think it's a great advice for example, for when we have a CER under the MDD and we want to go under the MDR using this PMCF. I think starting to use PMCF now can be really the best strategy for companies because they will use their product. So it's not no need to make any equivalent to anything else. I'm not sure that a lot of companies are starting now that, or I think they should, but I don't know if the message was spread. If I can say, they can save a bit of time, save also some time with notified bodies to really justify their CR. So maybe if somebody's listening, please start your PMC program now.
I think I see. Yeah. What they probably are thinking is this really true? Do they really mean it?
Yeah.
And yes, they do. And it makes good sense. But it's because I'm used to doing that. And when you have the whole package, it makes good sense, and it brings value to the whole business.
Okay.
But of course, it's a change in the mentality. And it's then change of habits are always difficult, right?
That's good. Related to CR, from the MDR to the MDD to the MDR. So a part of PMCF, is there something else that companies have to do to convert what they have already on their files to the new medical device regulation? Is there some kind of tips or tricks that they have to do?
Yes, I think I mentioned just a few points, but first, basically check, is it still a device? Most likely it will be, and the classification. Has anything changed here? There are something about software, by the way, that change the classification dramatically, right? And so make sure that you're in the right bucket and you understand what the specific requirements are. And then this general safety and performance requirement checklist, does that bring something that I need to take into consideration? And in that respect, also look at your claims. When I listen to the presentations from TÜV Süd, Basil, and also Susanne from TÜV Süd, the clinical claims need to be supported by clinical or other evidence. So it has to go hand in hand. And this requires, and this is something that they speak a lot about, is that you can no longer have a clinical department or regulatory department sitting in silos, not talking to the sales and the marketing people. So you have to talk together and make sure that you are aligned. And the best way to do that is to gather relevant people and then do a gap assessment on your clinical evidence and find out the claims that you would like to use to sell your product on that support the essential requirement, which is the regulatory department are interested in. What does that require of clinical activities? And you might want to do this stepwise, say what do we need to have and what is nice to have, and then gradually build up your claims and your evidence along the way. So when you set up your post-bio clinical program or your follow-up program, you are able to kind of integrate that. And I think one important aspect here is that I see more and more that hospitals are becoming very, very professional in acting both as a sponsor, conducting clinical investigations with either a private or an academic CRO on the side, and really produce high level of clinical evidence. So we have different sources of evidence. So you can, by setting up your gap assessment, know what you want to do and where you want to go. Set up a program that will over some time give you that support. So I think that's basically the main things that you will need to think about. And it's not new. It's has been there for many years.
Yeah, but I think manufacturers has to listen that again and again and again just to start to do it, and not be surprised when the MDR will arrive and say, "Oh, I didn't know. Nobody told me."
No. that doesn't help.
So great. So is there something else related to this?
Not in regards to the, I would say the clinical evaluation and the this about the equivalent products. I would think when I work with larger companies and I look at where the most dramatic changes, and some of it is pushed by the notified bodies. What are they actually going to? They have CERs in place. What are they actually then changing and upgrading to the MDR? And there is a specific things about this about measurable safety and performance objectives. This has become quite critical, and also stated from the notified bodies. So it becomes quite, like I said, with the sufficient clinical evidence, and then it's really a statement of different items that you need to consider. Here they want measurable objectives on safety and performance. So it becomes crystal clear.
Should be performant working, but what does it, as you said at the beginning, so what means in-house data? So we have to have a number and something, an objective.
We need a number,
to confirm that our product is working, because if we don't do that, it's more too much subjective. So at the end, we are not really providing the right proof.
Exactly.
Maybe before it was authorized because there was negotiations with notified body. Now it's clear that we have to provide some numbers, smart.
Exactly. So we have to calculate some statistics also. Then the state-of-the-art section, which is in the clinical evaluation, we call it SOTA. Clinical department, we have all these abbreviations. So the SOTA section, state-of-the-art, because equivalents are becoming smaller for many companies because they don't want to claim equivalence, the state-of-the-art section has increased. And that's why you see everyone is running around screaming for medical writers, build up the story around the state-of-the-art products. So state-of-the-art are products that competitive products or benchmark products. And you need the right history there. They want to see that also the alternative therapies that you are referring to, and you need that for your clinical investigations if you are setting these up. So that needs to be, it's not just a loose story anymore, it's very precise. And also that these, their post-market clinical follow-up activity plan has to be much more precise and really down to design and numbers and how broad it is, and the whole planning aspect needs to be considered. So these 4 areas is where I hear that the change are being implemented in regards to the MDR. Again, it's not new, but the way that the notified body looks at it, because they have focused now on the clinical, that's how it comes out.
So improvement, it's improvement with
improvement, and a lot of writing.
Increasing step by step. So what will be the next step? I don't know, but here it is. Okay, Helene. So so what can you help people on this specifically? So I suppose, as you've said, so you are specialized in clinical. So I suppose you are helping a lot of your customers just to solve those issues or to define their strategy. So is it correct?
Yeah, what we have done for a couple of our clients is that we, for many of them, we actually worked on their old clinical evaluation reports. So moving into the MDR, we are helping them kind of establish the new processes. There are some things that you need to improve in your quality assurance system, basically, how you set it up, how you work together, not in silos, and the planning and the process and the report, and how the whole Qmed aspect. And And these things we are helping them with. But on the clinical evaluation report, we go in together with the client and do this gap assessment on where do they want to be, which claims do they want to use going into the market, and look also at if it's illegal C devices, is there sufficient right now? It might be that we some years ago thought that this would be okay, but and it was accepted by the notified body, but now with the new statements from the commission and the notified bodies that this is no longer acceptable. So we will have to go back and set up a post-market clinical follow-up activity plan for them and write updated clinical evaluation. Also, the time span has changed slightly on when you need to update the reports. So it's now specified clearly, so you cannot justify and argue, well, in 10 years, I think this is safe, right? It doesn't work anymore. So here's per classification, you have to update. So we could, now is the time to update, get clear, start with scratch, and then plan for how you're going to set up your clinical trials. And then normally we would move into be the operational part on the clinical investigations. So many of the companies are setting up these umbrellas of clinical investigations where they add their different products and then collect data, which is a good way to do it. And sometimes the ethical committees and who also needs to approve it really doesn't want to see it. So it's quite quickly to set up and not that expensive as a normal investigation. So that's how we support our companies.
That's great. So I think within the next months or next year, there will be a lot of work in clinical for a lot of companies. So as we know that we have not a lot of notified bodies now, actually, maybe we'll also have a kind of a bottleneck. Maybe have a bottleneck on clinical. So choose partners now and try to work. And Helene is here to help you on that. Helene, yes. Also another topic. It's about the podcast. You have also a podcast. So please tell us about it. The name and what you are talking on this podcast.
Yeah, it's we've had the series one in the spring here, and I have been. It was by coincidence. I listened to your podcast and also another podcast, and I found it very beneficial. And maybe because I do have experience, so I like to listen to other people's experience. All these gray zones and the questions and the comments, and I can read the regulation, right? But how do they do it? What did they? I don't talk to notified bodies that often because they don't pick up the phone. So I need to get these input from another place. So that was actually how it started. I interviewed a couple of people on specific topics, and as a new starter within this, very long discussions. I think we have 1.5 hour talks, and it's a very nice experience for me, but I think it's very long for the audience. But
no, I think I'm trying to encourage a lot of people to also start podcasting, because it's not a crowded space actually. It's really good to have multi-channels, so people are listening to different styles or different things. So it's good also to have different podcasts. So about that. So it's great that you have yours. I'm also listening to other podcasts. So the one other I'm listening is Greenlight Guru.
Yes.
There is other ones that I'm trying now to connect also with. So please, if you want to have a podcast, so open it. Ask me if you want me to help you also on that, because I think it's great experience. I really like that, just because I have to connect with people like you, with other people, and really have a great discussion. For me, it's always a lot, because I have always different experience, and it's really, really great, I think, to share that also with the audience.
Yeah,
and
it's the right word.
It's real people with real words. So let's talk real, and just say to people what we think and what we interpret.
Completely agree.
So, Helene, how people can follow up with you?
Well, we have our homepage. I try to be very active on LinkedIn. also to reach out to people when they have questions. They can always reach me here at the office or by phone. I travel to conferences. I'm not that active on other Instagrams and whatever my kids have told me about, but I'm getting too old. But this is where I try to focus on LinkedIn. I do have some ideas about moving into the fall with new podcast series, and there you will also be able to connect with me and training material, and to be accessible. I think it's very easy for me to try and answer a question in a couple of minutes and then move on, and I rather have that people try and reach out to me, and there's always somebody here at the office that can find me.
No, it's great. So I will put all the information on the show notes, the details for contacting you on LinkedIn, on your website, so that people can reach out to you and just ask you any question. Just wanted to ask you, are you going to the TOPRA event, TOPRA Symposium 2019?
This year I am not. I'm sending one of my colleagues, Johanna Horbu. I'm going to, we have a lot of clients that are within the cardiology space, so I was just planning with my colleagues in US for it's called the TCT. It's a large cardiology conference, and then we have a large Scandinavian conference in October. It's clinical operation, but they're all very focused on the regulatory, so we will definitely talk.
Yeah, imagine. So for the audience, so I will be at the TOPRA Symposium 2019. So if you are interested also to meet with me, I will try to also make some podcast recording there. So it will be, I think, really an interesting time. So don't hesitate. Don't tell me if you are there so we can meet. I will connect with your colleagues, so maybe you can meet also there, Helene. Okay, Helene, so thank you for your time. Thank you for all the information that you provided. And I wish you a nice day.
Same to you, and thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome.